Welcome to the first unit in the life sciences module. This unit, we have to look specifically at categorizing all living things. So I'm going to help you work through the study notes as well as create your own summaries. So what you're going to need to complete this course then is either a writing book or a blank Word document where you can type in. What I've done in this document is I've used it as my life sciences workbook. So whether you're writing this or typing this, it doesn't matter. What you need to follow is the method that I've used. And the method that I've used is the Cornell method. Now, what the Cornell method allows me to do is it allows me to break up my study notes into parts that will be easier to understand by using questions to point out what is the most important information I need to remember. So what we start off doing in the Cornell method is we create a table and we give our first column, we give our first row the title heading. In this title, I've changed it to the unit that we're doing today, which is categorizing all living things, so that I'm aware of the topic that I am covering in the summary. Then I've gone and I've split the table up into two different columns. One column is to ask the question that I'm going to base the notes on. Now, this then allows me to break up my notes a little bit easier. So please do follow the method and let me know if you have any questions based on what we summarize. Please also note that you are not required to take down notes exactly like I've taken them down. Please feel free to go and paraphrase or write it out in a way that you find it easier to understand. These are merely just suggestions as to the explanations that you need for the questions. So let's start with. In the first unit, the first thing that we need to know is what exactly is life sciences. Life sciences involves the study of living organisms and related subjects. So life sciences studies anything that is alive. We also have to know what the term taxonomy is. Now, taxonomy is important because it is a term that we use when we talk about the scientific classification of all living things. So when we categorize living things, we refer to it as classifying those living things. Since we know now what taxonomy is, we also need to know who is the founder of taxonomy, or better yet, the father of taxonomy, and that would be Carl Linnaeus. So Carl Linnaeus is recognized as the father of taxonomy because he was the founder of the topic. Now, you also need to be able to answer why classification systems are important. If you are able to answer this question, then you'll understand what exactly classification systems are. So classification systems are important for scientists so that they can communicate effectively, as well as organize any knowledge about living organisms. Due to the fact that there are so many living organisms, it is important to have classification systems so that there is no confusion between different living organisms. Then we need to understand what the key areas of life sciences are. So life sciences is broken up into different key areas, and the most important ones that we need to know for the GED include biology, which is the study of all living organisms. We also need to know anatomy, which is the study of bodily structures. We need to know physiology, which studies the function of living systems. We need to know zoology, which is the study of animals. We need to know what botany is, which is the study of plants. Ecology is the study of organisms and the way that they interact with the environment that they live in. And lastly, we also need to know what genetics is, which is the study of heredity and genes passed down from parent to child. Next, we have to take a look at how living organisms are initially classified. So humans classify living organisms into groups. We do this based off of shared basic characteristics. So what this means is we take a look at specific determinants that will allow us to put living organisms into the same group. And that's where the next question comes in, kingdoms. How are they being determined? So if you look on the study notes, you'll notice that there are 5 kingdoms of life. What we need to take note of is that the kingdom is the most basic form of categorization. It is the first level that we categorize all living things into. So how do we determine what falls into which kingdom? Kingdoms, they would say, or we state that they are the most fundamental classification because they are the first group that we base our living organisms in. And kingdoms are determined by cell type and cell number. This means that when we classify living organisms, we're first going to take a look at living organisms that have the same type of cells and that have the same amount of cells. And then they will be placed into the same kingdom and later be subcategorized. Now, we also have to ask another question, which is, what are the 2 main cell types? Since we spoke about cell types and cell numbers, we also need to understand that there are different cell types that are going to determine whether or not there is a certain classification taking place. So the main cell types in living organisms happens to be prokaryotics and eukaryotics. Now, it is also important to understand that there is a difference between the 2 main cell types, and that is going to help us classify them further. So prokaryotics, they are cell types that lack a cell nucleus. This is something that we're going to look deeper into later on. What we need to know now about the cell nucleus is that it's like the brain of the cell. It contains all the energy and it stores the genetic information. So prokaryotic cells, they don't have a nucleus. Therefore, they have no little brain or no storage for genetics. Then prokaryotic cells also don't have membrane-bound organelles. Now, what this means is that they don't have any of the organelles that the cell requires, like eukaryotic cells. So this is going to make a lot more sense once we look at the next lesson on what the different parts of the cell are. For now, what you must remember, and only for now, is that a prokaryotic cell has no nucleus and a eukaryotic cell has a nucleus. Also remember that a prokaryotic cell has no membrane-bound organelles, but eukaryotic cells, they do have membrane-bound organelles. Then we have to take a look at what exactly are the 5 kingdoms of life, because there isn't just one kingdom. When we classify something, there cannot just be one type of classification. When we classify, it needs to be 2 or more. So therefore, the kingdoms are split into 5 different groups. Our first classification is the kingdom Monera. The kingdom Monera is a single-celled prokaryotic cell. So because it is single-celled, it is known as prokaryotic. Animals and plants are living organisms that have more than one cell. But Monera and Protista, they usually contain only one cell. Good examples of the kingdom Monera are common bacteria, or even the blue-green algae that we find growing along rocks. Then we have the kingdom Protista, and even though they are singular celled, they are usually more complex, more complicated. And they can also photosynthesize or be parasites. So when we talk about photosynthesis, then we need to take into consideration that Protista are going to have the ability to make their own food and energy. If they are unable to make their own food and energy, they become parasitic, meaning that they're going to latch on to another living organism so that they can live off of that organism's nutrients. Then we have the kingdom fungi. The kingdom fungi is known as immovable. Immovable meaning that they are unable to get up and move around on their own. And if you think about the most common fungi that we have, then the mushroom will pop up. And the mushroom is also known as the most common one because of, well, just how often we see it in our environment. Now, if we think about the mushroom, then we take into consideration that it in fact cannot move on its own because it has roots. It is planted into the ground. So fungi are usually living organisms that are not able to move on their own, but they do have more than one cell. And that's what makes them different now from kingdom Monera and Protista. They are multicellular. Kingdom fungi are also known as decomposers. And we need to remember that a decomposer is a living organism that breaks down other living organisms. So think about mold, for example. Mold grows by breaking down the bacteria that is in the environment. Our last two kingdoms are then the kingdom Plantae and the kingdom Animalia. The kingdom Plantae and Animalia are both multicellular, meaning they have more than one cell. But the main difference here is that kingdom Plantae are photosynthetic, meaning that they are going to be able to create their own food and their own energy by using the sun's energy. The kingdom Animalia, however, they are not photosynthetic. They are known as heterotrophic. Now, heterotrophic, this means, and I'm going to actually add this in at the bottom over here. What is heterotrophic? Just want to make a really important note here. Excuse me. Okay. So this is when a living organism cannot create their own food or energy, and therefore needs to feed off of another living organism to get food or energy. So that's what the kingdom Animalia is classified as, heterotrophic. We, and human beings fall under the kingdom Animalia, we cannot make our own food. We cannot photosynthesize, and therefore we eat other animals and plants to get energy. Now, I've finished what life sciences is, as well as the 5 kingdoms of life science. We also have to take a look at what the hierarchical classification is. So firstly, what is this hierarchical classification? What does this stand for? The hierarchical classification is like organizing a set of Russian nesting dolls. Good example here. Think about the Russian nesting dolls where you've got one big doll, and within that doll, there's another smaller doll that fits perfectly within it. And then the further you get into the doll, you'll see that there's one tiny little doll at the center. Now, the hierarchical classification is similar to this. You start with a very broad group, and then within that group, there are more specific groups, and they become smaller and more specific. So the hierarchical classification is what we then use to further categorize kingdoms, because we don't just have kingdoms that we can classify ourselves under. We're not just part of kingdom Animalia, but we're also part of a phylum and a class and an order, and so it goes on. Before we understand the different levels of the hierarchical classification, we do need to understand firstly what the binomial nomenclature is. And this is an important system that allows us to use the hierarchical classification, because the binomial nomenclature is a naming system for plants and animals where each species has a 2-part name. It's going to have the name of the genus and the name of the species itself. Let's quickly look over here at our notes. Here is an image on your notes that might help you understand this classification a little bit more. We said now that we have kingdoms that we classify living organisms into, and human beings fall under the kingdom Animalia. But we don't just fall under the kingdom Animalia, we also fall under a phylum. Phylums are what make up kingdoms. They are more specific than a kingdom. And we're going to look now at what makes up a phylum, what makes up a class, etc. So the whole point here is that we need to know that within kingdoms, we have phylum. Within phylum, we have different classes. Excuse me. The correct term for phylum is actually phyla. There we go. That's the plural form of phylum. This is singular. So within the kingdom, we have related phyla. Within the phylum, we have classes. Classes are then made up of different orders. Orders are made up of different families. Families are made up of different genera or genus or plural. And then genus, they are made up of different species, right? So what this allows us to then do is it allows us to use the binomial nomenclature so that we create a two-part naming system that's going to allow us to not get confused with the different living organisms that we have. Okay, so this is the benefit or the advantage of using this naming system. It allows us to avoid any confusion caused by common names. So, like I said, the hierarchical system is an order. It orders living organisms from the broadest spectrum to the most specific spectrum. So you can think of it as a triangle as well, or a little pyramid, excuse me. Excuse me, let me just change my mind. Here we go. In this pyramid, what we see over here is that at the way bottom, we have the kingdom. Kingdom is the most basic form that we've got here. So therefore, it's going to be the broadest, the one that all the others on top are going to fit within. And so as the pyramid rises, the different levels become smaller and more specific. So let's take a look at a human classification. As an example, humans fall under the kingdom Animalia. Why? Because we are able to move on our own, but we're not able to make our own food or energy. Then we fall under the phylum Chordata because we are vertebrates. Now, vertebrates are known as animals with a backbone or a spine that has, and that also have a skeleton within their bodies. And therefore, we fall under the kingdom Chordata. Then the class that we fall under is the class Mammalia, because mammals are known as chordates, excuse me. Mammals are known as chordates, animals with backbones that in fact do have fur or hair as well as milk glands. So because we have hair follicles and because females are able to produce milk, we are known as mammals. That is the class we fall under. Then we fall under an order as well. And the order we fall under is the primate order. So because we are mammals that have collarbones and grasping fingers, so that means our fingers are able to bend, that means that we are known as primates. Then we take a look at which family we fall under. We fall under the Hominidae family. We are hominids. Hominids are primates that have relatively flat faces and a three-dimensional vision. So if you look at our face, you'll notice that it's not extremely pointy like a hyena, but it's not exactly flat like a turtle. So relatively flat faces and three-dimensional vision is what causes us to be hominids. Within the hominids, you get a further classification, which allows us to go into the genus order. So we fall under the Homo genus because we are hominids that have an upright position and also because we have larger brains. Within the genus, we also have the species. So we are part of the Homo sapiens species because we are a member of the genus Homo, but specifically, we fall under the genus Homo that has higher foreheads and thin skull bones. And that's what makes us Homo sapiens. So now if we take a look at the binomial nomenclature, then you'll see that
by using the genus and the species, that's where you get Homo sapiens from. And this allows scientists to not get confused with everyday English, Afrikaans, or other languages. Right. Last part. We also need to be able to then understand exactly what a species is. And when we think about species, we need to remember that species contain living organisms. Each species needs to have living organisms that can reproduce with each other. That is the whole point of the life cycle, is so that your species are able to reproduce and continue their existence. If a species is unable to reproduce, they go extinct. So therefore, species need to be able to have the same cell types, the same amount of cells, in order to reproduce with each other. And that's just what we call interbreeding. And yeah, there we go. That is the first lesson that we have on life sciences. The first assignment follows right after this, and it will contain 20 multiple choice questions, which will make sure that you do understand the content covered in the first unit.